Good evening all, and welcome back to Fear Knocks. Tonight we idle beneath a mountain where road becomes room and water draws lines on black stone. These 10 verified accounts come from night crews, highway watch, hikers, and scanner pulls gathered near a single-lane bore that keeps one red lamp burning. Mountain rain slicks the entry, tires lift fine mist, and voices carry farther than light. You'll hear a horn answer from deeper than the wall, a flashlight bloom with no hand behind it, and a test echo return with an extra breath. Some threats wear reflective gear and wave a fake work truck through the dark. Others live in falling seep, black ice near the mouth, and rock that shifts when thaw returns. Subscribe to Fear Knocks for weekly documentary-style true horror stories that blur the line between evidence and nightmare. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's roll into the tunnel where distance starts to listen back.
I've been highway watch for 15 years, working the mountain passes of the Pacific Northwest. My patrol vehicle, a heavy-duty SUV, is my office, equipped with everything from a multi-channel radio and PA system to traffic cones, first aid, and a detailed logbook. My job is safety, plain and simple, monitoring traffic flow, responding to incidents, and ensuring that any roadwork adheres to strict state regulations. I know these roads, every curve and mile marker, every tunnel and turnout bay. I know what belongs and what doesn't. It was 02:30, a late shift, and the air was sharp with the scent of damp pine needles and the metallic tang of ozone from the high-voltage lines that ran parallel to Highway 12. The road surface was slick from an earlier drizzle, reflecting the distant stars like scattered diamonds. My patrol vehicle's engine hummed a steady, familiar note as I cruised, checking for rockfall, debris, or any signs of trouble. The Klickitat Tunnel, an older bore cut through granite, was a routine check. It often underwent maintenance, but nothing was scheduled for tonight. My logbook was clear. State protocol for any active roadwork, especially on a major artery like Highway 12, is unambiguous. A clearly visible permit board must be displayed at the site entrance, detailing the permit number, effective dates, and contact information for the crew chief. More critically, all traffic control devices must be synchronized and unambiguous. A solid red signal means stop. A flagger's instructions must always align with the signal. Any contradiction is a severe safety violation, grounds for an immediate work stoppage and a hefty fine. It's a rule etched into every highway watch officer's mind, because lives depend on it. As I rounded the final bend approaching the Klickitat Tunnel portal, my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating something that instantly tightened my gut. There it was, a portable traffic signal, its red lamp glowing with an unwavering intensity, holding the mouth of the tunnel. And beside it, a standard pickup truck, its hazard lights flashing, a figure standing by the driver's side, clad in high-visibility gear, waving cars inside. A direct contradiction. My mind raced. Red light means stop. A flagger waving traffic into a closed-off area against a red light? That was beyond a violation. It was an active hazard. I slowed my vehicle, my amber warning lights now flashing, pulling into a small turnout bay about a quarter-mile back. I grabbed my binoculars, my hands already noting the time in my log. 0247, H12EB. Klickitat Tunnel approach. Unauthorized. Signal/flagger. Conflicting instructions. Through the lenses, the scene was eerily clear. The red signal lamp, its lens throwing a soft, almost fuzzy halo in the damp night air, pulsed with a hypnotic glow. It wasn't a sharp, clear warning, but a diffused, inviting crimson. The figure in the high-vis vest continued their slow, deliberate wave. The permit board, a standard yellow rectangle, stood unnervingly blank in the light of the work truck's hazards. Not just empty of a permit number, but entirely devoid of any text, as if it had been wiped clean, or never written upon at all. This wasn't just a minor oversight. This was a complete procedural breakdown. I tried to raise the flagger on my multi-channel radio, cycling through common construction frequencies. Nothing but static. I pressed the button for my PA system. Attention work crew. This is Highway Watch, Unit 7. Please confirm permit status and traffic control instructions. My voice, amplified, echoed slightly off the granite face of the tunnel. The flagger didn't react. The wave continued, slow and steady. This was no longer just a safety violation. It was an active threat. I had to intervene. I engaged my patrol vehicle's hazard lights and drove forward, slowly, approaching the portal. As I drew closer, I noticed the work truck was just a regular pickup, not a dedicated utility vehicle with proper attenuators or specialized markings. The flagger's movements were stiff, almost mechanical, lacking the subtle shifts in posture or weight that even the most dedicated flagger would exhibit over hours. It was like watching a marionette on invisible strings, performing a single, endless gesture. I remembered a time years ago when I was a rookie, and I'd accidentally left my hazard lights on during a lunch break, draining my battery. A simple, stupid mistake that taught me diligence. This, however, felt different. This wasn't a mistake. I pulled up to the signal, stopping short of the waving flagger. The red light was still solid, unwavering. The flagger was still waving cars into the tunnel. I watched, horrified, as a couple of vehicles, confused by the conflicting signals, hesitated, then proceeded past the red light, following the wave into the darkness. This was a complete breakdown of protocol, a direct invitation to disaster. I lowered my window. "Sir, you're directing traffic against a red signal. What's your permit number?" The flagger turned their head slowly. The face was obscured by the brim of a hard hat and the deep shadows cast by the tunnel's entrance, but I caught a glimpse. The eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting the red light of the signal like two crimson points. There was no response, no sound, just the continued, unwavering wave. The arm moved with an unnatural smoothness. The permit board, now directly in my headlights, remained starkly blank. The work truck's engine wasn't running, no exhaust visible in the cold air. The only sound was the low thrum of my own engine and the distant wind. I checked my rear-view mirror. Another car was approaching. I had to stop this. I keyed my mic for dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Highway Watch Unit 7. Urgent. Conflicting traffic control at Klickitat Tunnel, eastbound portal. Unauthorized work crew, possibly hostile or impaired. Request immediate backup, code 3. I have a direct safety hazard." A burst of static. "Unit 7, say again?" "Your transmission is broken." My heart pounded against my ribs. The red signal lamp, that I've spent 14 years as a subsurface maintenance tech, specializing in bore integrity and acoustic profiling. My work takes me deep, sometimes thousands of feet below the surface, into the guts of the earth where the only light is from a headlamp, and the air smells of wet rock and ozone. My territory is the network of old exploration bores and new utility shafts that spiderweb beneath the high desert. We use high-frequency acoustic pulses to map internal structures, detect fissures, and ensure the stability of the shafts. It's a precise science, reliant on predictable physics. Sound travels, reflects, and returns, telling a story of distance and density. That's the rule I live by. Every echo has a source. This particular shift started like any other, a late-night run-through on bore shaft 73, a deep vertical cut that had been dormant for decades before recent geological shifts mandated a re-evaluation. My partner and I were tasked with a full acoustic sweep. We had our gear cart loaded with the emitter, the phased array receiver, and the spectrum analyzer. The air was cool and still, a consistent 52 degrees Fahrenheit, with the faint metallic tang of groundwater in the ventilation current. The rock face around us was dark, streaked with mineral deposits that glittered faintly under my headlamp. Our setup point was the mid-bore mark, a small excavated alcove about 1,800 feet down. We'd rappelled in, secured the lines, and deployed the equipment. My partner took up position at the radio post, a small comm station we'd established further up the shaft, monitoring the primary data feed and logging the returns. I stayed with the meter cart, calibrating the emitter and receiver, watching the local readouts and ensuring the pulse was clean. "Emitter status green," I called out, my voice tight in the comms. "Ready for first sweep." "Copy that. Initiating sequence in 3, 2, 1, pulse away." My partner's voice was calm, professional. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the rock, a sensation more than a sound, as the high-energy acoustic pulse shot down the bore. On my screen, a sharp spike indicated the outgoing signal. Then, a series of smaller, distinct peaks began to populate the display, each one a reflection from a known geological layer or structural reinforcement. We watched the time of flight, counting the beats against the bore schematics. The first 10 returns were textbook, solid, clean, perfectly aligned with the expected distances. The 11th return came in, a strong, clear peak indicating the shaft's base. That was it. The sweep was complete. But then, after the final expected echo had faded from the display, a faint, almost imperceptible ripple appeared. It wasn't a peak. It was more like a drawn-out, shallow trough, a whisper of activity that shouldn't have been there. I squinted at the screen, then checked the gain settings. Sometimes, a bit of electrical noise or a harmonic resonance from the pulse could produce a ghost artifact. I'd seen it before, especially when I was tired. I'd been on shift for 16 hours and my eyes were starting to blur. "Anything on your end?" I asked, rubbing my temples. A brief pause. "Hold on. Yeah, I'm seeing something. A late return, very low amplitude. Looks like residual noise." "That's what I figured," I said, already reaching for the recalibration sequence. "Probably just a little bleed through. I'll re-zero the dampeners." "Wait," my partner cut in, a hint of something new in their voice. "Run it again.
Don't touch anything yet." I hesitated, then complied. It was against protocol to rerun a test without recalibration after an anomaly, but the request was firm. I hit the sequence. Another deep thrum. The familiar series of echoes painted themselves across the screen. And then, after the final solid bass echo, it returned. This time it wasn't just a ripple. It wasn't loud, barely audible above the hum of the equipment, but it was unmistakably there, layered onto the tail end of the acoustic return. It was a breath, a slow, deep, human breath. I stared at the meter cart's display. The spectrum analyzer showed nothing. No distinct frequency spike. No discernible energy signature corresponding to the sound. The decibel meter barely registered a blip, well within the ambient noise floor. My heart began to pound, a heavy, dull beat in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I breathed into the comms. "Affirmative, clear as day," my partner replied, their voice now tight with a different kind of tension. A breath. After the last echo. What the hell is that? I started systematically checking every sensor. Pressure differentials? None. Air composition? Stable. Thermal imaging? The bore was a uniform temperature. My hands moved over the controls, checking every parameter, every diagnostic. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The bore was empty, a sheer 1,800-foot drop to a solid base. There was no one else down here. There couldn't be. "Meters are clean," I reported, the words feeling hollow. No source. Nothing physical to account for it. "It's a mirrored breath layer," my partner said, their voice hushed. "It's not from the bore. It's in the echo, like a parasitic signature." The standard protocol for identifying unknown acoustic returns involved adjusting the emitter's frequency and power, or moving the receiver to triangulate the source. But we tried it. We shifted the emitter a fraction of an inch, focused the beam. The breath didn't strengthen, didn't shift its position in the acoustic timeline. It remained a consistent, faint, late addition to the echo, always after the last physical return. It defied all attempts to pinpoint a physical origin. The protocol failed because there was nothing physical to pin. The only sound was the low drone of the ventilation system, and I'd thought about the absolute quiet of my own apartment late at night. A comforting stillness. This was different. This was a silence invaded by something impossible. "Let's try passive listening," I suggested, my voice barely a whisper. No pulse, just the receiver. My partner agreed. I powered down the emitter, leaving only the sensitive array receiver active. The bore fell into an unnatural silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic drip of water from a distant crevice. The air hung heavy, cold against my face. We waited, straining to hear. A minute passed. Then another. My partner's breathing was loud in my ear through the comms. And then, from the receiver, faint but undeniably present, came the shh, hiss. The slow, deep breath. Not an echo of anything but a direct, raw input. It was exactly the same. We exchanged a look through the comms, a silent acknowledgement of the profound contradiction. Our instruments, designed to interpret the physical world, were registering something that had no physical presence. It was a sound that existed only as an acoustic layer, superimposed onto the very fabric of the bore's echo. It was a breath that never had lungs, a sigh without a body. I logged the anomaly, detailing every failed attempt to identify a source. My partner confirmed the data from the radio post. We secured the area, leaving the bore in silence. Though the memory of that sound resonated deeper than any pulse we could generate. The supervisor was notified. They called for a specialized team to investigate, but offered no explanation, no theory that fit the facts. As I powered down the last of the equipment, a faint, residual hiss seemed to emanate from the receiver, like the last wisp of air escaping. The knowledge that our tools, our trusted instruments of measurement, had revealed something so utterly non-physical, something that shattered the very laws of acoustics, left a cold, lingering dread that followed me out of the shaft and into the night. I've been a night crew lead for heavy excavation projects for 17 years, mostly tunneling and shaft sinking in the Pacific Northwest. My team and I are used to the dark, the damp, the constant rumble of machinery, and the unpredictable nature of rock. We navigate by headlamp and instrument, relying on thermal imagers, ground-penetrating radar, and borescopes to map the unseen. Our work is precise, dangerous, and governed by strict protocols. Every shift starts with a full equipment check, a safety briefing, and a review of geological surveys. Every anomaly, no matter how minor, gets logged and investigated. That's the rule. You don't ignore what the rock tells you. This particular project was a drainage tunnel, cutting deep into a granite massif. We were roughly 300 feet in, pushing through a particularly dense seam. The air was cool, smelling of ozone and wet stone, heavy with the metallic tang of fresh rock dust from the last blast cycle. We'd just finished mucking out the latest advance, and it was my job to survey the new end wall before the drillers moved in. My partner, a solid operator with 10 years on the job, held the laser level steady while I swept the thermal imager across the newly exposed face. The wall stretched 20 feet high, 30 wide, a jagged tapestry of gray and black granite, glistening where a fine seep line traced a path down its center. The thermal showed the expected cool blues and greens of stable rock, with warmer yellows around the recent drill scars from the last blast. Everything normal. Then, 2 small blooms of light appeared on the imager's screen. Not hot, not cold, but a distinct, unidentifiable signature, like a pair of soft, diffuse eyes. They were perfectly round, about 6 inches in diameter each, positioned maybe 2 feet apart, centered horizontally on the wall, roughly eye level. My first thought was a reflection. Maybe a stray beam from a distant headlamp, bouncing off a wet patch. It happens. "Hold on," I said, lowering the imager. "Did you see that?" My partner, who was looking directly at the wall, frowned. "See what? Just the wall." I raised the imager again. The blooms were still there, unwavering. I swept the device away from the wall, then back. They reappeared in the exact same spot. This wasn't a reflection on the screen. This was something on or in the wall itself. "Switch off your lamp for a second," I told him. He clicked his headlamp off.
The tunnel plunged into near total darkness, save for my own lamp and the faint glow of the imager screen. And then, I saw them with my naked eye. Two faint, ethereal glows, like headlights seen through thick fog, breathing softly from the solid rock face. They weren't bright enough to cast shadows, just luminous points, a pale, milky white against the dark granite. "What the hell?" my partner whispered, his lamp still off. He'd seen them now too. "Is that bioluminescence?" "Not like anything I've ever seen," I replied, my voice low. We'd occasionally found patches of phosphorescent minerals, but they were usually faint, uneven, and always cool to the touch. These were distinct, perfectly circular, and the thermal imager showed an active signature, not just reflected light. They weren't generating heat, but they were definitely there on the thermal. A unique signature that wasn't temperature-based. My initial mistake was thinking it was a simple visual trick. I'd been on shift for 12 hours, and fatigue makes you look for the easiest explanation. I'd seen car headlights through a dense fog once, back on a rural road outside my hometown, and they'd looked exactly like this. Diffuse, disembodied, impossible to pinpoint. But that was fog, not solid granite. "Keep your lamp off," I instructed, moving closer, my own headlamp beam now focused on the glows. The light didn't intensify or diminish as I approached. It was constant. I reached out a gloved hand and touched the rock face directly where one of the blooms appeared. The granite was cold, wet, and utterly solid. No crack, no fissure, no source. It felt like every other square inch of the wall. The light seemed to emanate from within the rock. "Check the borescope kit," I said, stepping back. "We need to get eyes inside that rock." Our protocol dictates that any unexplained visual or instrumental anomaly requires immediate investigation. If it can't be explained, work stops. This was the core rule. We drilled pilot holes all the time for rock bolts, geological samples, or to vent gas pockets. It was standard procedure. My partner quickly assembled the borescope, a thin fiber optic camera on a flexible shaft. I directed him to an old drill scar, a perfectly circular hole about an inch in diameter, from a previous exploratory bore, maybe 3 feet above the lights. It was a good angle to try and peer down towards them. He fed the scope in, its tiny light illuminating the rough-hewn interior of the rock. We watched the monitor. Nothing but gray granite, wet and fractured from the blast. We tried another scar, then another, closer to the lights. Still nothing. The lights remained, unwavering, on the surface. "It's like they're just on the skin," my partner muttered, frustrated. I grabbed the rock hammer and tapped the wall around the lights. The granite rang solid. No hollow pockets, no loose sections. I even tried scraping at the surface with the hammer's pick, thinking maybe it was some kind of growth or mineral deposit. The pick scraped against solid rock, leaving a faint gray line. But the lights persisted, unmarred. This was where the protocol began to fail. We could investigate, but we couldn't resolve. We couldn't explain it. "We need to drill a fresh hole," I decided. Right into the center of one of them. This was a deviation. Normally, we wouldn't drill without a specific purpose approved by the geological team, but this was an emergency. The lights were an unknown. We couldn't proceed with the next blast cycle with this unexplained phenomenon staring back at us. My partner prepped the rock drill, a heavy pneumatic beast that vibrated through the rock like a jackhammer. The air compressor roared to life, filling the tunnel with its deafening thrum. I watched the lights intently as he positioned the drill bit. As the bit made contact, a fine spray of water mixed with rock dust exploded from the point of impact. The drill bit bit into the granite, grinding and churning. The lights remained, seemingly unaffected by the physical intrusion. We drilled for a full minute, pushing the bit about 2 feet deep. Then, my partner pulled the drill back. The lights were gone. "Did we just puncture them?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the receding compressor hum. I peered into the freshly drilled hole. Nothing but wet, gray stone. I shone my lamp into it, then inserted the borescope. The camera showed a perfectly cylindrical tunnel, rough but empty. No source, no glowing material. When the crew reached the spot, there was only wet stone and an old drill scar. The fresh hole was just another scar. We stood there, staring at the now darkened spot, the only evidence of the lights being the fresh drill scar and the lingering metallic smell of hot rock. My partner looked at me, bewildered. "They just vanished," he said. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. We checked the thermal imager again. The area was cool, indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. "Log it," I said, defeated. Unexplained visual and thermal anomaly. Disappeared upon physical contact. We spent the next 2 hours documenting every detail, taking photos, marking coordinates. We even tried scanning a wider area with the ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find some subsurface anomaly. A void, a strange mineral deposit. Nothing. Just as we were packing up, ready to call the supervisor and explain that we couldn't advance the tunnel as planned, my partner let out a choked gasp. "Look," he whispered, pointing. There they were, 2 small blooms, breathing softly, like soft eyes. But this time they were about 15 feet to the left of our original spot, nestled deeper into the newly exposed end wall, near a cluster of old cable hooks used to secure temporary lighting. They were fainter this time, almost translucent, but unmistakably the same phenomenon. An embedded light echo, appearing from within solid rock, with no physical source, no heat, no discernible energy signature other than the light itself. We could drill into the rock, but the light was never there. It was always just beyond our reach, always through the solid wall. We logged the new coordinates. The supervisor came down hours later, stared at the lights, and had no explanation. Neither did the geologists. We couldn't blast through them, couldn't ignore them. The tunnel had to be rerouted, abandoning that entire section of the end wall. To this day, the lights appear intermittently, deep within that section of the mountain, visible only to those who know where to look, and only through the solid, unyielding granite. I've been running freight routes for nearly 15 years, mostly through the mountain passes out west. You learn the roads, the weather, the quirks of the old tunnels. My rig, a Kenworth T800, is practically an extension of myself. I know its hum, its rattles, the way it handles a grade in sleet. My logbook is meticulous. My pre-trip inspections are by the book, every time. It's how you stay alive out here, especially on the stretches where cell service drops off,
and you're just a speck on a long ribbon of asphalt. This particular run was an overnight haul. Refrigerated goods from Spokane down towards Portland. I was on the back half of my shift, hitting the Cascades around 200. The air was cold, clear enough for good visibility, but the asphalt was damp, slick in patches. I'd been through the old Iron Creek Tunnel hundreds of times. It's a relic, cut through solid rock, barely wide enough for 2 trucks to pass comfortably. The kind of place you feel the weight of the mountain pressing down. My mistake, a small one, was pushing the fuel light. It had come on about 20 miles back, but the gauge still showed a sliver. Enough for another 30, I figured. I had a mental note to fill up at the next major stop. That's the kind of complacency that creeps in after years on the road, when you think you know your machine and your route better than the readouts. I was maybe 3/4 of the way through the Iron Creek Tunnel, approaching one of the emergency pull-off recesses carved into the rock face. There's a faded white stop line painted on the concrete just before it, a holdover from some forgotten maintenance protocol. That's where the Kenworth coughed. Not a sputter, more like a choked gasp. Then the engine died. No warning lights, no grinding, just silence, save for the hiss of the air brakes settling and the drip of condensation from the tunnel ceiling. 2:18. I checked the dashcam timestamp. My first thought was fuel. I tried the ignition. The starter motor whined, caught, then spun uselessly. The gauge was now dead empty. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I was stuck, dead center in a poorly lit, narrow tunnel, a mile from either entrance. My protocol kicked in immediately, hazard lights on, set the emergency triangles, checked the CB radio. The CB was dead air, just static, a faint hiss that swallowed any possibility of a signal. I tried switching channels, scanning the bands. Nothing. This wasn't unusual for Iron Creek. The rock interfered with transmission, but usually I could at least catch a distant squawk. Tonight, it was absolute silence. My primary communication protocol, reaching out for a tow or assistance, was a bust. I sat there for a minute, the only sound the gentle tick of the cooling engine. The air in the tunnel was heavy, smelling of damp concrete, exhaust fumes, and something else, something mineral and cold, like wet rock after a blast. I remembered a summer trip with my niece, years ago, when we stopped at a roadside diner and had thick milkshakes. The simple joy of that sweetness felt a million miles away. Frustration built. I needed to signal. I reached for the air horn cord, a long, sustained blast, a deep, resonant bellow that filled the tunnel, echoing off the concrete and rock. A distress signal. I held it for a good 5 seconds, then released. The sound slowly faded, reverberating down the length of the tunnel, a diminishing roar. Then, from somewhere deeper than the tunnel wall itself, came a response. It wasn't an echo of my horn. It was a distinct sound, lower in pitch, somehow more ancient. It wasn't sharp or abrupt. It began as a low thrum, a vibration that I felt in the seat of my pants, then expanded into a deep, guttural note that seemed to roll under the truck like slow water. It wasn't loud, not like my air horn, but it was pervasive, a sound that permeated the metal and glass of the cab. It felt less like a sound traveling through air, and more like something moving through the very ground, surfacing directly beneath me. I froze. I'd never heard anything like it in any tunnel, anywhere. My first rationalization was a maintenance vehicle,
maybe working in a parallel bore or a lower level. But the sound didn't have the metallic clang of machinery. It was organic, almost a moan. It faded slowly, leaving a lingering hum in the air that was almost imperceptible. My hand instinctively went to the dashcam controls. The system was always recording, a standard liability measure. I rewound the last minute of audio. The truck's air horn was unmistakable, a powerful single-note blast. Then, after its decay, the other sound. I played it back again, isolating the segment. My horn, loud and clear. Then, the answering sound. The mic on the dash, designed to pick up cabin audio and external noises, rendered it with chilling clarity. It wasn't one note, it was two. A lower, sustained rumble, almost like a sub-bass frequency, overlaid with a slightly higher, mournful tone. They were distinct, yet intertwined, a strange harmonic chord that seemed to emanate from the very earth. The subsurface resonance was palpable, a low frequency that vibrated through the floorboards. I grabbed my heavy-duty maglite. The beam cut through the gloom of the tunnel. I got out of the cab, stepping onto the damp concrete. The air was colder now, the silence oppressive. I walked around the front of the truck, shining the light under the chassis, along the ground. Nothing. No vents, no grates, no signs of any other vehicle or structure that could have produced such a sound. The tunnel wall was solid, rough-hewn rock, punctuated by the occasional emergency phone box, all dark and silent. I walked towards the end recess, a small, unlit alcove maybe 20 feet from where I was stuck. It was just a small indentation, used for storing sandbags or minor equipment, nothing more. I swept the light across its rough surfaces. Nothing unusual, just rock. Then it came again. Fainter this time, but unmistakable. The same two notes. The same low, rolling quality, seeming to emanate from deep within the rock face, directly behind the recess. It wasn't loud enough to feel the vibration, but it was clear. A soft, almost inquisitive hum. It felt like it was listening, waiting. I got back in the cab, heart pounding. My training, my years of experience offered no explanation. Every protocol I knew dealt with mechanical failure, road conditions, human error. Not this. I tried the CB again, frantically scanning, hoping for anything. A crackle, a voice, a sign of the normal world. For a moment, a burst of static. Then, a low, distorted hum. It wasn't human speech. It wasn't a radio signal. It was a garbled, drawn-out version of the same two notes, playing through the static, echoing the subsurface resonance I'd just heard. It lasted only a second, then the CB went dead again, returning to its silent hiss. I sat there, the engine dead, the emergency triangles glinting faintly in the distance. The dashcam continued to record, a silent witness. The tunnel was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It felt like a held breath. My logbook lay open on the passenger seat, waiting for an entry I couldn't possibly write. I've been a bridge inspector for 17 years. Most of that time has been spent on structures spanning the Mississippi River, from the Quad Cities down to St. Louis. It's a job that demands precision, a good head for heights, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Every rivet, every weld, every expansion joint tells a story, and it's my job to read it, to anticipate failure before it manifests. My kit is standard issue: hard hat, safety harness, rappelling gear, ultrasonic thickness gauge, a set of calipers, and a thermal imager. I log everything: time, temperature, humidity, wind speed, structural readings, visual observations. Redundancy is built into every procedure. This particular structure, Bridge 317, runs east-west, a cantilever truss with a main span of 1,200 feet. It's an older design, built in the late 1930s, and it requires constant vigilance. My assignment that Tuesday, October 24th, was a routine Level 2 visual inspection of the western approach spans and the first main truss section. The weather was clear, cold, with a low-lying fog hugging the water. Wind speed was logged at 2 knots, gusting to 4, from the northeast. I started at 7:15, working my way down from the deck, checking the stringers and floor beams. The air temperature was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the steel itself registering 36.5. My routine is a rhythm, almost meditative. Clip in, descend, observe, log, move. Every component has an expected state: rust, fatigue, deformation. These are the variables I look for. But the environment itself is a constant. Air moves, water flows, steel expands and contracts. Cause and effect are fundamental. If something moves, there's a force acting upon it. That's the core protocol. The physical law that This area is a network of cramped spaces, service niches, and runoff seams designed to channel water away from critical components. It's often overlooked, a place where debris collects and minor corrosion can start. I was checking a particularly tight section, a recessed service niche about 2 feet wide and 4 feet high, tucked between a diagonal brace and a vertical strut. It was dark in there, even with my headlamp. The air felt still, heavy, and noticeably colder than the surrounding structure, perhaps due to stagnant air and the mass of steel. My thermal imager confirmed it. The air inside the niche was 34 degrees, 2 degrees colder than the ambient steel. As my headlamp beam swept across the back wall of the niche, it caught something unexpected. Hanging from a simple steel hook plate, bolted directly into the strut, was a high-visibility work vest. It was a standard orange mesh vest, the kind subcontractors wear for deck work. It shouldn't have been there. Bridge 317 had been clear of all non-essential equipment during the last inspection cycle. But what drew my attention wasn't its presence, but its state. The vest was gently turning, a slow, deliberate quarter rotation to the right, then back, then right again. My first thought was a draft. It's a common occurrence in these enclosed spaces, air currents funneling through gaps. But the air around me was still. I held my breath, listening. No whistle, no rustle. I glanced up. Directly above the hook plate, a heavy galvanized chain, part of an old hoist system, hung perfectly motionless. Not a single link swayed. I looked at my anemometer. 0.1 knots. Barely a whisper. The vest, however, continued its subtle, rhythmic turn. Right, back, right. I approached cautiously, my boots scraping on the grit of the catwalk. The cold from the niche seemed to intensify. I reached out a gloved hand, careful not to disturb the air. As my fingers neared the vest, I saw it. A static pinch twist. The fabric of the vest near the shoulder was caught in a slight, almost imperceptible twist, as if it had been wrung out and then released, leaving a memory in the material. This twist, combined with the vest's lightweight mesh, could theoretically cause it to slowly unwind and rewind in still air, driven by residual static electricity or the material's own elastic memory. It was an unusual but physically plausible explanation. I'd seen similar things with lightweight flags in dead calm, or even a piece of paper curling on a desk. My initial log entry simply noted, "Found contractor vest, service niche, observed static pinch twist rotation. No detectable draft." I made a mental note to retrieve it on my way back. For now, I had other sections to cover. I continued my inspection, checking the runoff seam below the niche. It was clear, no blockages. I found a small cluster of rust flakes, logged their location, and moved on. The rhythmic hum of distant traffic on the deck above was a constant companion, a reminder of the thousands of tons of steel and concrete holding steady. It made me think of my first job, working on a much smaller pedestrian bridge over a creek. The biggest challenge then was keeping the squirrels from nesting in the expansion joints. Simpler times. An hour later, I was making my way back, finishing up the last few inspection points. As I neared the niche, I prepared to retrieve the vest. My headlamp cut through the gloom. The vest was still there, and it was still turning. But this time, it was different. The rotation was faster, more pronounced, almost a full 90-degree swing before slowly reversing. And the static pinch twist I had observed earlier was gone. The fabric hung perfectly straight from the hook, smooth and unwrinkled. My anemometer still read 0.1 knots. The chain above was still perfectly still. I checked the thermal imager again. The niche was still 34 degrees. I reached out, closer this time, and felt nothing. No air current, not even a whisper of a breeze. The vest continued its quarter turn, back and forth, as if an invisible hand was gently twisting it. I pressed my gloved palm flat against the steel strut next to the hook plate, feeling for any vibration, any resonance that might be transmitted through the structure. Nothing. The steel was cold, inert. I pulled out my phone, intending to record the anomaly. As I fumbled with the camera app, my finger brushed against the emergency call button by mistake. I canceled it immediately, a minor procedural lapse born of distraction. I recorded a 30-second clip of the vest, the motionless chain, and a sweep of the still air around it. The video showed exactly what I saw: a piece of fabric rotating in a vacuum of stillness. I tried to rationalize it. Residual air currents from my earlier presence? Unlikely, after an hour. A subtle vibration? The bridge was massive, designed to absorb such forces. I decided to try a simple test. I took a single strand of cobweb, delicate and almost invisible, from a beam nearby and carefully draped it over the vest, near the point where it met the hook. If there was any air movement, however slight, the cobweb would shimmer, would break. It lay perfectly still, undisturbed, as the vest continued its slow, impossible dance beneath it. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, watching. The vest turned. The cobweb did not move. The chain did not move. The anemometer read 0. The cold from the niche seemed to seep into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the steel. I logged the observation, noted the disappearance of the pinch twist, and added a specific mention of the motionless cobweb. My protocol for retrieving foreign objects states I should remove the item, bag it, and tag it for disposal or return to the contractor. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Not then. Not with that motion. I radioed my supervisor. "Unit 317 Alpha," I said, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "Requesting a secondary observation on a localized atmospheric anomaly. Section SWP2, Catwalk Level 3. Visual confirmation required." "Copy that, 317 Alpha," came the reply. "What's the nature of the anomaly?" "Motion without draft," I said, unexplained. There was a pause, a slight hesitation in the radio static. "Understood. We'll dispatch Unit 2. ETA 30 minutes. I waited. The vest continued its turn. I kept my distance, my eyes fixed on it. When Unit 2 arrived, it was my partner, a veteran inspector with even more years on the job than I had. He looked at the niche, then at me. I explained everything, showing him the video, pointing out the cobweb. He watched the vest for a long minute, then checked his own anemometer, his thermal imager. He even held a lighter near the vest, watching the flame, but it burned steady, unperturbed. "I've never seen anything like it," he finally said, his voice low. "No air movement, nothing." He tried to reach for the vest, then stopped, his hand hovering. "It's cold in there," he muttered, pulling his hand back. We decided to leave it, to secure the area and report it up the chain. We logged the incident as atmospheric anomaly, unexplained. The next morning, when a specialized team arrived with more sensitive equipment, smoke pencils, laser anemometers, even a portable static charge detector, the niche was empty. The hook plate was bare. The vest was gone. There was no sign of forced removal, no scuff marks, no disturbed dust. The cobweb I had placed was still there, intact. But now it hung over nothing. The niche was still cold. The team found nothing, no residual energy, no explanation. The incident remains open, filed under an internal designation. 317A001, unresolved. And sometimes, when I'm alone on a bridge, I still feel that cold from the niche. And I wonder what... The call came in just past 2 a.m. Dispatch described it as a single vehicle incident on the old mountain road, just past the portal curve. No injuries reported. Driver already out of the vehicle. My 22 years on these winding passes had taught me that no injuries reported often meant the driver was in shock, or simply hadn't realized the extent of their injuries yet. Or, sometimes, it meant they weren't there at all. I fired up the old rig, the diesel engine rumbling to life, cutting through the damp, pre-dawn silence. The air was thick with the smell of wet pine and cold asphalt, a familiar scent that usually brought a sense of calm, a routine I knew well. I checked my logbook, noted the time, and confirmed the location with dispatch. The portal curve was a notorious stretch, a tight, blind bend where the road narrowed significantly, flanked on one side by a sheer rock face and on the other by a steep drop into the ravine. It was a place I'd pulled more than my share of wrecks from. My standard procedure for any incident, especially on a curve like that, was to approach slowly, lights flashing, and assess the scene from a distance before getting too close. I always looked for the approach angle, the skid marks, the debris field. Anything that told the story of how the vehicle got where it was. The story was usually clear. Speed, ice, deer, or a moment of inattention. As I rounded the final bend leading into the portal curve, my floodlights cut through the gloom. There it was, a dark sedan pressed against the rock wall. But something was off immediately. The car wasn't crumpled, not in the way you'd expect from a direct impact with solid stone. It looked almost parked, gently nestled rather than crashed. My initial thought was that the driver had somehow managed to brake just in time. But the angle was all wrong. I pulled the rig to a safe distance, set the cones and activated the amber flashers. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the road was still slick with residual moisture. I grabbed my camera and flashlight, stepping out into the chill. The air was still, heavy. No wind. Just the hum of my truck and the distant rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the ravine. Walking towards the sedan, I scanned the asphalt. No long dramatic skid marks. No shattered glass or scattered plastic. Just the car, perfectly still against the gray rock. Then I saw it. The description from dispatch had been minimal, but the visual was anything but. Thin water. It ran in a perfect, unbroken line, starting from a small, almost invisible drain lip set into the rock face about 20 feet before the impact point. From that drain, the water flowed, not along the natural camber of the road towards the ravine side, but directly away from the white paint edge that marked the lane. It carved a distinct, almost intentional path across the asphalt, diverging from the normal flow, and following it precisely were the tire marks. They were clear, fresh, and undeniable. The sedan's tires had left a dark, wet impression, tracing the exact trajectory of that thin stream of water. It was as if the water itself had drawn a lane, an invitation, and the car had simply followed. The marks didn't swerve, didn't fight the pull. They just went. They led straight from the main lane, veering left, following the water, and ending abruptly at the rock wall, hair close to the stone. My first thought, a quick, almost dismissive one, was that the driver must have been distracted, overcorrected, and the water just happened to be there. It was late, I was tired, and the brain looks for the easiest explanation. But the precision of it gnawed at me. The water path was too perfect, too consistent, deviating from the normal road drainage with an unnatural exactitude. I knelt, shining my flashlight on the asphalt. The tire marks weren't skids. They were rolling impressions, deep and even. The car had turned into that path. I tried to raise dispatch again for an update on the driver, but the radio crackled with heavy static. Unit 4, I tried. Can you confirm driver status? Over. Nothing but a hiss. I tried a few more times, cycling through channels, but the signal was completely dead. It wasn't uncommon for dead spots in these mountains, but this was a major route. A minor protocol failure, but one I'd experienced before. I walked around the sedan, my unease growing.
The driver's side door was slightly ajar. I peered inside. The interior was immaculate. No papers on the dash, no coffee cups, no personal effects. The seatbelt was neatly retracted. It looked like a showroom car, not one that had just been involved in an accident. Dispatch had said driver exited vehicle, but where had they gone? There were no footprints in the damp earth by the road shoulder. No sign of anyone walking away. I re-examined the drain lip. It was small, barely a trickle. Certainly not enough to create such a distinct, persistent stream across a relatively flat stretch of road. The water itself was clear, cold, and seemed to shimmer faintly under my flashlight beam, almost like it had a different viscosity than normal rainwater. I remember a time, years ago, when I'd found an old, abandoned toy boat in a puddle after a storm. And for a moment every shot came out blurry, or with strange, elongated light streaks, even though the rest of the scene was sharp. I tried my professional camera, same result. Frustration mounted. This wasn't just a strange accident. It felt orchestrated. My usual protocol was to secure the vehicle, document everything, then wait for law enforcement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the path was the real story, not the car. I abandoned the standard recovery procedure momentarily, needing to understand this. I traced the tire marks again, my boots squelching softly on the wet asphalt. They stopped exactly at the point of impact. There was no scrape, no grind, no scuffing along the rock wall beyond the initial point of contact. The car hadn't slid. It had simply stopped, perfectly aligned with the wall, as if it had been placed there by an enormous, unseen hand. The hair close to stone was literal. There wasn't even a paint transfer. A sudden, intense cold washed over me, localized entirely to the area above the water path. It wasn't the ambient chill of the mountain night. It was sharper, deeper, almost painful. I looked up. The drain lip, the source of the water, seemed to be receding into the rock, becoming less distinct. The perfect lane of water was thinning, breaking up, losing its unnerving consistency. It was fading. An overwhelming urge to leave, to get the car out and get myself out, seized me. I rushed back to the rig, grabbed the winch controls, and quickly hooked the sedan. My hands trembled slightly as I secured the chains. As the winch motor whined, slowly pulling the car away from the rock, I noticed it. A faint, almost transparent residue on the stone where the car had been resting. It looked like dried salt, but when I touched it, it felt like nothing at all, dissolving into a fine, cool dust that left no trace on my gloved finger. I got the sedan onto the flatbed, secured it, and quickly packed up my cones. As I drove away, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror. The portal curve looked normal again. The drain lip was just a dark crevice in the rock. The perfect lane of water was gone, leaving no trace of its impossible path. I never mentioned the water in my report, only the vehicle recovery. Dispatch never asked. But I still think about that perfect lane, and what, or who, it was truly inviting. I've spent the better part of 18 years as a safety auditor, primarily in heavy civil construction, with a specialty in underground operations. Tunnels, deep bores, shafts. The kind of work where the sun is a memory and every piece of equipment is a potential hazard in the perpetual twilight. My certifications cover everything from confined space rescue to advanced atmospheric monitoring. But mostly, my job boils down to ensuring that the complex dance of men and machines in the dark happens without incident.
The region I work in is known for its challenging geology, often requiring massive tunnel boring machines. And the project I was on last fall was no exception. A multi-mile transit tunnel, 300 feet below the surface. My workstation was a small, climate-controlled module near the main portal, equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time feeds from fixed camera posts along the bore. It was a monotonous, essential task, watching the continuous flow of muck trains, utility rigs, and personnel carriers, checking for protocol adherence. Every hard hat light, every reflective strip, every operational beacon on every piece of rolling stock had to be accounted for. Visibility is paramount down there. Dust, mist, the sheer scale of the bore. They all conspire to swallow light. Our standing protocol, drilled into every crew member and auditor, was simple. Light must not merely be present, it must throw. A light source that doesn't effectively illuminate its surroundings is a failed light source, a hazard. It's not about the bulb glowing. It's about the beam painting the rock, the rail, the path ahead. It was late into my shift, sometime past 0200 when Unit 7, a heavy utility rig pulling a section of trailing gear, began its slow pass through camera post 3. The air in the module was stale, tasting faintly of ozone from the ventilation system, a familiar scent that usually signaled deep tunnel work. On monitor B, the feed from post 3 showed the rig approaching, its primary headlamps cutting through the bore's ambient gloom. As the roof of Unit 7 moved into the frame, the rig's main safety beacon, a large amber strobe mounted high on the bore crown, activated. It pulsed with a distinct, steady rhythm. I watched it. The beacon glowed. On the monitor, it was a perfectly rendered, pulsing amber disk, bright and sharp. But as the rig continued its slow crawl, something felt off. The area immediately surrounding the beacon, the damp, dark rock of the bore crown, the section of center rail directly beneath the rig, remained in deep, unyielding shadow. The rig's other functional lights, its headlamps and auxiliary work lamps, clearly painted the surfaces they were aimed at, shifting the shadows, highlighting the textured rock and the gleam of the rail. But the light from the roof beacon, so vivid on the screen, seemed to terminate at its own housing. It was a point of intense light that offered no illumination to anything beyond its own lens. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Fatigue. It was easy to misinterpret visual data in the dark, especially on a screen. I initially dismissed it as a trick of the camera's auto-gain, perhaps compensating for the bright pulse of the beacon by darkening the rest of the frame. A common enough artifact. I noted the timestamp in my log, a mental flag to re-examine the recording later. But the unease persisted. The shadows were too flat, too absolute. There was no softening, no spill, no ghosting of amber on the rough rock face. It was as if the light existed only within the confines of the beacon itself, a self-contained luminescence. I picked up the comms handset. Control to Unit 7, operator. Hold position at the 400-meter mark. I need you to reverse and make a second pass through camera post 3. There was a brief pause, then the operator's voice, slightly muffled by his respirator. Everything all right, auditor? We're on schedule. Just a verification check on your roof beacon, Unit 7. Standard procedure. I kept my tone level, professional. My job wasn't to cause alarm, but to ensure safety. The operator grumbled something inaudible, but complied. I saw Unit 7 slowly back up, its reverse lights briefly flaring, before stopping. Then, the second pass. The rig moved forward again, the heavy treads grinding against the rock, a sound barely perceptible through the module's insulation.
but a constant, low thrum in the bore itself. On monitor B, the roof beacon pulsed once more. Amber, perfect, bright. And still, the bore crown directly adjacent to it, the segment of center rail beneath it, remained shrouded in the same deep, unpainted shadows. The light was there on the screen, a digital representation of an active safety device, but it refused to interact with the physical environment. It was a beacon that threw no light. It was an image of light, not a source of illumination. I pulled up the raw feed, bypassing any compression or auto-enhancement filters. The effect was identical. I checked the other cameras that had a line of sight to that section of the bore. From a slightly different angle, the same contradiction held. A glowing beacon on the rig, but no visible throw onto the surrounding surfaces. The rig's other lights continued to function normally, carving out their own illuminated paths, casting clear, shifting shadows. This only served to highlight the anomaly of the beacon, a stark contrast between functional light and this strange, self-contained glow. I thought about the lux meter I carried, the standard tool for measuring light intensity and throw distance. It would be useless here. If I were standing next to that rig, the meter would register nothing from that beacon beyond its immediate housing. The camera, with its automatic gain, was seeing something my eyes or a physical instrument would not. It was a camera gain ghost, a digital phantom of illumination. I remembered a small, decorative LED light on a miniature Christmas tree my grandmother had. It glowed brightly, a tiny point of intense color, but it cast no discernible shadow on the wall behind it. No soft halo. It was a light for itself, not for the room. This was that, but on an industrial scale. A safety device that proclaimed its presence without performing its function. The protocol for a failed safety beacon was clear. Immediate shutdown of the affected equipment until repairs could be made. But how could I justify a shutdown when the camera feed, my primary remote verification tool, showed a perfectly operational light? The evidence was contradictory. The digital proof of light was absolute, yet the physical evidence of its effect was entirely absent. I logged the incident, noting the time, the rig number, the camera post. Roof beacon observed glowing on camera feed. No discernible light throw onto bore crown or center rail. Shadows remain flat. It felt insufficient. A technical description that failed to capture the unsettling paradox. I called the supervisor. We have an issue with Unit 7's roof beacon. It's anomalous. Unit 7 was eventually pulled from the bore for a physical inspection. The maintenance crew confirmed the beacon was drawing power. The bulb was intact. The lens clear. It was, by all accounts, functional. Yet, in the recordings, the shadows remained flat, undisturbed by its amber pulse. The incident report was filed, marked unexplained visual anomaly. The rig went back into service with a new beacon installed, just in case. But the original, the beacon that threw no light, still sits in a storage bin. A perfectly good light that somehow, somewhere, ceased to illuminate. I've been a roadside ranger for 15 years, working the northern mountain passes. My patrol vehicle is a second home, equipped with everything from first aid kits to tow cables, a mobile office, and a landscape that can turn hostile in minutes. My territory covers 100 miles of winding road, steep embankments, and old rock cuts. Most days are routine: clearing minor rockfall, assisting stranded motorists, checking on hikers who've wandered off trail. I know every curve, every lay-by, every seep in the rock face. Or so I thought. It was late October, past midnight. A cold front had moved through, bringing a steady rain that had just let up, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and damp earth. My shift was nearly over, but I had one last sweep to make along the old highway section, a stretch notorious for its narrow shoulders and a series of deep rock cuts topped by natural overhangs. I was running a little behind schedule, a long day catching up to me. I'd skipped my usual visual check of the old tunnel entrance further up, figuring it could wait until morning. A small oversight, but one that stuck with me later. I pulled into a familiar lay-by, a gravel patch nestled directly beneath a massive granite crown line. This particular overhang was a relic from the original road construction, a natural shelter where water often seeped and dripped long after a rain. It was a good spot to pull over, make my final log entry, and gather my thoughts before heading back to the station. The hum of the idling diesel engine was a low, comforting drone in the quiet night. I powered down the auxiliary lights, leaving only the amber roof bar flashing a slow, rhythmic pulse against the damp rock face. The air outside was cool, but inside the cab it was warm and still. I was updating my digital log, noting the clear roads and the lingering dampness when I heard it. A soft, distinct thump-thump from directly above the vehicle. My first thought was a deer, maybe a late-night wanderer on the ridge above, dislodging a loose stone. It happens. I've heard worse. I dismissed it, focusing on the screen. Then it came again. Thump-thump. Not random. Rhythmic. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy for a small animal. Too regular for falling debris. I paused, my thumb hovering over the submit button. The sound was directly over the cab, amplified by the thin metal roof. It sounded like footsteps. Heavy, low-heeled boots on a hard surface. I knew this section of the road. There was no walkway above, no maintenance deck, no accessible ledge wide enough for a person to walk. Above the crown line was a steep, near-vertical rock face, topped by dense, impenetrable scrub and forest. Even a seasoned climber would struggle, and certainly wouldn't be walking casually up there in the dead of night. I clicked off the internal dome light, plunging the cab into near darkness, save for the faint glow of the dash and the amber flashes from the roof. I strained my ears. The sound had moved, now directly over the passenger side. Thump-thump, thump-thump. Each step was clear, unhurried, as if someone was taking a leisurely stroll. Then I noticed the water. From the edge of the granite overhang, tiny rivulets of water were still seeping, coalescing into individual drops. Drip, drip, drip. And with a jolt, I realized the drips were falling in time with the footsteps. Not just random drops, but a precise, uncanny drip, 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 drip cadence, mimicking the heavy, unseen steps directly above my head. My training kicked in. Unusual sounds, potential trespassers. Standard procedure. Exit vehicle, spotlight the area. Radio dispatch, approach with caution. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight from its mount, the cool metal familiar in my hand. Stepping out, I swept the beam across the rock. The light cut through the residual mist, illuminating only damp granite and the dark, tangled undergrowth at the very top.
I checked the ground around the vehicle. The gravel was damp, but there were no fresh prints, only the faint indentations from my own tires. I tried to rationalize it. Water pressure building up in pockets, releasing in a rhythmic fashion. A trick of the acoustics. But the sound was too distinct. Too much like footsteps. My protocol for visual confirmation had failed completely. There was nothing to see. How do I report footsteps on the roof when there's no roof? It felt absurd, something I'd be laughed out of the station for. I got back into the vehicle, the door closing with a soft thud. For a moment, silence. Then, as I settled into the seat, the thump-thump resumed. It had moved again, now directly over the rear of the cab, then slowly, deliberately, towards the passenger side, then the front. The drips continued their eerie synchronization, a low, wet percussion accompanying the unseen movement. I remembered a summer shift, years ago, when the heat shimmered off the asphalt, and the only sound was the distant drone of cicadas. I'd spent hours just watching the highway, the sun baking the patrol car, nothing but the occasional passing vehicle. It was mind-numbingly boring, but predictable. This was anything but. The steps continued their slow traverse, now directly over the windshield. The drips were falling onto the glass, perfectly timed with the heavy, low-heeled thump-thump. I could see the water streaking down the glass, each drop a tiny, precise punctuation to the unseen presence. It was directly above me, clear as day. The sound was undeniable. My hand went to the radio mic. Unit 1 to dispatch. My voice was a little rougher than usual. I'm currently at the Route 17 lay-by, under the old granite overhang, requesting what? Backup for phantom footsteps? A sanity check? The words died in my throat. What could I tell them? That something was walking on the roof of my vehicle, but there was nothing there. The silence from the other end of the line would be deafening. I put the vehicle in drive. Slowly, I pulled out from under the crown line, the tires crunching on the gravel. As the vehicle cleared the overhang, the sounds abruptly ceased. No more thump-thump. No more synchronized drips. Just the hum of the engine and the distant murmur of the forest. I drove a quarter-mile down the road, then turned around. I passed the lay-by, scanning the rock face again from the road. Nothing. I drove further, found a turnoff, and approached the area from the ridge above using a rough access trail. I parked and walked to the edge, looking down at the crown line where I'd been. The dense scrub was undisturbed. No sign of passage, no broken branches, no dislodged stones. I never reported it. It remains an entry only in my personal notes. A contradiction to every protocol, every logical explanation I've ever learned. The memory of those rhythmic drips, perfectly timed with unseen steps on a roof that wasn't there, still surfaces on quiet, rainy nights. I've been a tunnel guard for 17 years, operating out of the district's western approach. My shift starts at 2200, ends at 0600. It's mostly routine, monitoring traffic flow, checking structural integrity sensors, responding to disabled vehicles. The section I oversee includes the main bore, 2 ventilation shafts, and the service access tunnels. My primary tools are the patrol vehicle, its onboard monitoring systems, the handheld thermal imager, and the 2-way radio. The air here always carries the scent of damp concrete and ozone, a smell that's become as familiar as my own breath. My routine begins with a full perimeter check of the portal apron, the wide concrete expanse leading into the tunnel mouth. This involves a slow pass in the patrol vehicle, checking security fences, light fixtures, and the integrity of the approach road. Tonight, the temperature had dropped sharply, and a thick, ground-hugging fog had rolled in from the river, clinging to everything. It wasn't uncommon, but it did reduce visibility significantly, even with the high-mast lighting. After the apron, I moved into the main bore for the initial sweep. The tunnel itself is a beast of engineering, carved through solid rock, stretching nearly 3 miles. Our core protocol, especially during low visibility, is constant vigilance on the main monitoring screens in the guard pullout, supplemented by physical patrols. Any anomaly, be it a stalled vehicle, debris, or an unusual reading from the air quality sensors, triggers an immediate response and a log entry. The system is designed to be redundant, with multiple cameras, motion detectors, and acoustic sensors covering every foot of the bore. I was on my second pass, about a mile in, when my comms crackled. It was Unit 2, the guard covering the eastern approach. "Unit 1, you seeing this fog?" he asked, his voice slightly distorted by static. "Affirmative, Unit 2. Dense out here. Visibility may be 50 feet on the apron. Inside the bore it's patchy, but clearing toward the center." "Yeah, same. Just had a big rig slow to a crawl. He's probably just being cautious." "Understood. Keep an eye on the flow." I continued my patrol, the vehicle's low beams cutting through the haze, the hum of the ventilation fans a constant drone. The air inside the tunnel was cooler than usual, the fog somehow penetrating deeper than I'd ever seen it. It swirled around the vehicle, catching the headlights in ghostly eddies. I pulled into the guard pullout, a small recessed area about halfway through the tunnel, designed for quick stops and equipment checks. The pullout houses a smaller monitoring station, a backup to the main signal hut at the western portal. I ran diagnostics on the air quality sensors, checked the structural stress readouts. All green. I logged my position and the current atmospheric conditions. My eyes drifted to the main monitoring screen, cycling through camera feeds. One of the cameras, positioned near the western portal apron, showed the fog as a solid, undulating wall. It was then, as the image refreshed, that I saw it. A plume of vapor, thicker than the rest, seemed to detach from the main body of the fog, directly in front of the tunnel mouth. It swirled, coalesced, and for a fleeting second formed a distinct shape. Not just a random pattern, but something angular, almost calligraphic. It looked like a word. My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes straining. The shape held for less than a second, then dissolved back into the swirling mass. It was gone. I blinked, shook my head. Fatigue, I told myself. It was 0230 and I'd been up since 1800. I'd once spent a whole shift convinced a shadow in an unlit maintenance access was a person, only to find it was a discarded canvas tarp. Pareidolia, the brain making patterns out of randomness. That's all it was. Still, the image stuck. I rewound the feed frame by frame. The camera provided a wide-angle view, slightly distorted but clear enough. There it was again. A dense, white exhalation, forming, holding, then dissipating. I couldn't definitively say it was a word, not with the pixelation and the movement, but the impression was undeniable. It was structured, purposeful. I pulled up the audio feed from the dash mic on the portal apron camera. The system is sensitive, designed to pick up engine sounds, tire squeals, anything out of the ordinary. I played the segment. Nothing but the low rush of the wind, the distant rumble of a passing truck on the highway above, and the faint hiss of the fog. No vocalization, no tone, just the sound of air moving. a subtle shift in the ambient noise, coinciding precisely with the visual anomaly. It was like a breath, but without the accompanying sound of a human throat. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. This wasn't just a visual trick. The air moved. Something displaced it, shaped it. I radioed the supervisor. "Supervisor, this is Unit 1. Requesting a review of portal apron camera feed. Timestamp 022714 to 022718. Go ahead, Unit 1. What's the issue?" The supervisor's voice was calm, accustomed to late-night oddities. "Possible visual anomaly. Appears to be a vapor formation. Also a corresponding audio signature on the dash mic, consistent with air displacement, but no source identified." "Understood. I'll pull the feed from the signal hut. Stand by." While I waited, I decided to do a physical check of the portal apron. Protocol dictates that any unidentifiable anomaly should be investigated on site, if safe to do so. I drove out, the fog now so thick that the high-mast lights were just blurry halos. The air was heavy, damp, and tasted faintly of iron from the river. I scanned the area with my thermal imager. No heat signatures, no discarded objects, nothing. The fog I remembered a summer storm when I was a kid, playing hide-and-seek in the cornfields near my grandmother's farm. The fog that night felt just as thick, just as disorienting, but without the underlying sense of unease. "Unit 1, this is Supervisor. I'm looking at the feed. You're right, there's a distinct vapor formation. Looks structured. And the audio, I hear it. A low puff almost. But no source, no vehicle, no person." "Affirmative, Supervisor. My thoughts exactly. I just completed a physical sweep of the apron. Nothing here." "All right, Unit 1. Log it as an environmental anomaly. I'll flag it for review by engineering in the morning. Keep an eye on the camera feeds. If it happens again, report immediately." "Understood, Supervisor. Environmental anomaly. Logging now." I returned to the guard pullout, the incident logged, the protocol followed. But the explanation felt hollow. Environmental anomaly. It didn't account for the distinct, almost intentional shape. It didn't account for the precise timing of the air displacement on the dash mic. The rest of the shift passed without further incident, though I found myself constantly checking the portal apron camera, waiting, half expecting. The fog remained, a silent, swirling presence. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a fatigued mind, a random confluence of atmospheric conditions. Yet, the image persisted in my mind. The mist, rolling from the tunnel's mouth, shaping itself into something that looked like a word. A silent utterance caught only by a single pair of eyes and an unfeeling microphone. And the microphone, the objective piece of equipment, confirmed the movement of air, even if it couldn't assign a speaker. The evidence was there, undeniable, yet unexplainable. It was simply air moving, forming a shape, then dissolving. And it had spoken to no one, and to me alone. I've been a geotech watcher for 17 years, mostly in the northern Rockies. My specialty is slope stability, particularly in areas prone to freeze-thaw cycles. We're talking about rock faces that expand and contract with the seasons, slowly shedding material, or sometimes much faster. My gear is standard issue. Total stations, extensometers, crack gauges, and a good old-fashioned hammer and chisel for setting gauge pins. This last winter, I was assigned to a section of the I-90 corridor, specifically a notorious cut known locally as the Grinder. It's a steep, exposed granite face, about 80 feet high, that sees heavy icing and sun exposure, making it a prime candidate for rockfall. My routine involved daily inspections, sometimes twice a day during rapid thaws. I'd walk the base, checking for fresh spall, listening for the telltale creaks and groans of stressed rock. More critically, I'd take readings from a series of fixed monitoring points. These were usually stainless steel gauge pins anchored deep into the rock, with a corresponding pin on the adjacent block, allowing a precise measurement of any relative movement. For smaller, more subtle indicators, I'd paint thin cross marks directly over hairline fractures. The idea was simple. If the fracture opened, the painted line would separate, revealing the fresh, unweathered rock beneath. If it closed, the lines would realign, but the underlying fresh gray would remain visible, a record of the movement. This system had served me well for nearly 2 decades. Rock moves, it expands, it contracts, it sheds, but it always moves outwards in a net sense, pushed by ice, gravity, or seismic activity. It never, ever, moves back in against the general creep direction. That's the core protocol, the fundamental rule of rock mechanics. It was mid-March, a week of unusually warm days after a bitter cold snap. The sun was high, baking the snow off the upper ledges, and the meltwater was running in rivulets down the face. I was at the southern end of the cut, what we called the end face because it tapered sharply into the embankment. There was a particular hairline fracture there, about 3 feet long, that I'd been watching since December. I'd painted a crisp black cross mark over it, roughly an inch wide. My baseline reading from the total station, taken in early January, showed no significant movement. On that Tuesday, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and melting pine needles, a smell that always reminds me of spring in the mountains. I pulled out my field glasses, then my camera, zooming in on the cross mark. My breath hitched. The hairline fracture had opened, visibly. Not by much, maybe 1/16 of an inch, but it was undeniable. The painted cross mark was now offset. The upper half had slid down and to the right, leaving a sliver of fresh, lighter gray granite exposed beneath the paint. It was exactly what I expected to see during a thaw. I logged the observation, took high-resolution photos, and noted the time. 14:17. I made a mental note to check the nearest extensometer, point EF4, on my next pass. I even thought for a moment that the baseline might have been slightly off, or my initial paint line not perfectly straight. But the fresh gray was proof. The next morning, Wednesday, the temperature had dropped slightly overnight, but it was still above freezing. I returned to the end face. The first thing I did was recheck the cross mark. My stomach tightened. The hairline was still there, but it appeared to have narrowed. And the cross mark, it was almost perfectly aligned again. The sliver of fresh gray granite from yesterday was gone, or nearly so. It was as if the rock had shifted back into its original position. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and checked my field glasses. No, it wasn't an illusion. The painted lines were almost perfectly contiguous. I pulled out my logbook. Yesterday's photos clearly showed the offset, the fresh gray. Today, it was barely perceptible. I took new photos, time-stamped at 0932. I chalked it up to an initial misread on my part. Or perhaps the paint had been thicker in one spot, creating an optical illusion. I'd been working long hours, pushing toward the end of the season, and fatigue could make you see things. It was a minor, realistic mistake to dismiss the first anomaly. But then, the pattern started. That Friday, after another warm day, the hairline was open again. The cross mark was offset, the fresh gray exposed. This time, I didn't dismiss it. I took meticulous measurements with a crack gauge, logging the exact width, 0.07 inches. I also checked EF4, the extensometer. It showed an outward movement of 0.06 inches from its Tuesday baseline. Everything was consistent with normal creep. The following Monday, after a weekend of cooler temperatures but still above freezing, I was back. The hairline was closed. The cross mark was perfectly aligned. The fresh gray was gone. The crack gauge read 0.00 inches. EF4 showed zero net movement from its original baseline, despite the outward creep measured on Friday. The protocol for monitoring freeze-thaw creep, which relies on cumulative outward movement, was failing. The rock was not just moving, it was resetting. I called my supervisor. The end face is showing some anomalous readings, I told them. The cross mark is shifting, then shifting back. The crack width is fluctuating to 0. Equipment error? The supervisor asked, their voice flat. I don't think so. I've recalibrated the crack gauge. EF4 is reading 0 net movement over 4 days, but I logged outward creep on Friday. Send me the logs and photos. I'll take a look. I spent the next week practically living at the end face. I set up additional gauge pins closer to the hairline to get more localized data. The camera recorded. The pins confirmed. The hairline would open. The cross mark would slide, showing the fresh gray. Then, after a day or two, particularly after a slight drop in temperature or a period of less direct sunlight, the hairline would close. The cross mark would slide back, perfectly covering the fresh gray. It was like watching a wound heal in reverse, the skin knitting itself back together without a trace of the injury. The stone was not just closing. It was shifting back to its previous, undisturbed state, as if the movement had never happened. The fresh gray, the undeniable evidence of separation, was being recovered. One afternoon I sat there, watching the end face through my binoculars. The sun was warming the rock, and I could practically feel the expansion. I saw a faint tremor, almost imperceptible, run through the granite. The cross mark began to separate, slowly, almost reluctantly. The fresh gray appeared. I remembered a summer afternoon as a kid, watching my pet turtle, Shelley, pull her head back into her shell, the way her ancient, wrinkled skin folded and disappeared. This was different. This wasn't retraction. This was a stone, unmoving. My time-lapse footage was a nightmare of contradiction. Frame by frame, the crack would open, then close. The cross mark would appear to slide, then unslide. The data from the gauge pins became useless. One day a pin would show a 0.05-inch separation. The next it would read 0.00, or even a negative value, implying the pins had moved inward relative to each other, which was physically impossible given their anchoring. I sent the time-lapse footage and the conflicting data to the supervisor. They called me back, sounding frustrated. The footage shows something, but the data is garbage. It looks like the camera is shaking or the pins are loose. We need reliable numbers, not optical illusions. The pins are solid, I insisted, and the camera is on a tripod, weighted down. Look, I'll send a crew out to re-anchor everything. Maybe we need to reassess the whole section. I knew what I had seen. The hairline in the face opened and closed between checks after thaw. A painted crossmark slid just enough to show fresh gray under it. Then it shifted back, perfectly, impossibly, covering the fresh gray, as if it had never been exposed. The stone that shifted back. It defied every principle I knew, every year of experience. The end face now just sits there, monitored by new, more robust equipment, but I still check it every day. The data they're getting is more consistent now, showing only minor, expected creep. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I think I can still see the ghost of that fresh gray, just beneath the paint, waiting to be revealed again.